Alright, so part one of this video, because I think I react less well in just whole chunks, so this is going to be part one. Eric, I think you are way too formalist in your sense of, you try to make the collective its own working thing, which is understandable because, sure, there's individual interests, approaches to politics, which focus more on rights, which are this pro forma, understandable thing. Then there's, I don't know what pro forma means. Then there's collective responsibility focuses, which rely on, responsibility. And you hold that, responsibility is best held individually. I sort of disagree. Because responsibility itself, if we, broaden that to the law, should we, I don't know, privatize the courts or whatever the fuck? Now, you'd say probably that is a more moralistic calculus, sure. But, when do things become moralistic and when do they stop being moralistic? You'd say that under a rights framework, right, then, saving a drowning man. Is that Crazy Taxi? And the usual suspects? You'd say that saving a drowning man, like being forced to do that, is not a right that you can have. Or having universal health care, that's not a right that you can have. Now, in terms of actually, if you have two people on an island, one of them is forced to be a doctor, sure, that's not realistic. And in terms of what's private, what's public, that's complicated. But I hold that there's already regulations surrounding that. And that those regulations actually pass through the system better if, rather than having to hold these companies justifiable, which is a big angle, like Trump, he paid $750 in taxes. You could say the tax code is too complicated. I don't know if we agree on that. I'm so angry. I'm coming at this with a conflictive attitude. So my argument is, these general frameworks of politics as being, to the crowd, to the masses, indistinguishable from, one binary to the next, sure, but wouldn't that be your own position as well? Up to a point, because I'm not actually arguing, oh, you should be trailing in the viscosity of your own opinions. I'm saying that, there's a good balance of, like, principle and examples that you can rely on, and not everything has to be a sort of, like, argument to one side. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you argue against the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, when you argue against the Health Committee, or whatever the fuck that's called. I don't know if you're anti-coronavirus. Sorry, I haven't watched you in a bit. Maybe a month ago is the last time I watched you. Still cool. Still like you. You're still cool, I think. But libertarian and short-sighted in thinking that you can frame everything in a debate mindset, which you literally can, but you can't. Because, for instance, these debates between Trump and Biden are just a disgrace. Okay, I'm going to get my mind organized. I'm going to look off in the distance. Sort of Jello Biafra like. Yeah, so anyway, when you support, private schools under this sort of specter of like, would it even work or not? Regardless of whether or not you're right, it, from, let's say, a sort of, because law is short-sighted, from an institutional sort of originality standpoint, I don't know what they call it on the Supreme Court, originality, or, when something is based on something else that is on, the levee is sure to break. That is kind of feeling like the canary in the coal mine when you actually compare it to schools that have largely been privatized, like in Louisiana, and I don't think it's been helping them. So I feel like complete straw man here, but maybe you have these positions because these sort of idealized intellectual studies have sort of said that, this works on that, works on this. So in an ideal system with nothing else coming in between it, necessarily stuff will work like this. But I don't think that you can really treat stuff like an idealized system. Because necessarily, a part of public policy is to sort of deal with public policy that's complicated, and not necessarily to just come at it with like a sledgehammer, but like the ESTPs in history, like FDR, like Andrew Jackson, like Theodore Roosevelt. I have no knowledge of history. To sort of, come at it with like a twist, you know? And sure, you could say that these presidents, their legacies weren't very good. Like Andrew Jackson, Democratic Party totally fell downhill after him. Theodore Roosevelt, Taft, the conservative Republicans who didn't really go with his own movement. FDR, the dismantling of the New Deal by the old faction, or whatever it is called, the old coalition, something like that, between Midwestern Republicans and Southern Democrats, or Trump right now, who's doing a shit job, or like Lyndon Baines Johnson, who did both like the Civil Rights Act and fucking what was that called? It was Vietnam. I wasn't doing that for a fact. Like, being blunt, I totally actually forgot that like Vietnam was a thing kind of hiked up under his watch. Did he start Vietnam? I forget. I don't know anything. Do you know anything? You never talk about Vietnam anymore. You never talk about Vietnam anymore. The new movie come to theaters. Dad, you never talk about Vietnam anymore. Why don't you talk about Vietnam? Son, like, I was there 30 years ago for like 3 years. How could I talk so much about Vietnam? I need it for my new Prestige movie. I need to talk about your time with a Vietnamese mistress, and to say that you had a very good time and that communism is good because you had a Vietnamese mistress and you were living in a commune, even though communes aren't very large scale reproducible. You know, you're doing things that seem good until they happen at the expense of other people. Okay. So this is where this I think psychological angle, which you're good at, clashes with the societal angle, which I couldn't necessarily say you're bad at, but you're bad at, because at least to my sort of framing requirements, I think an actual political position requires some idea of how not just politics shapes people, but some idea of how people shape politics. Some idea of how, things don't just work in some rigid, deterministic way, but that people work out things and diversity somehow happens so that democracy is representable. And the fact that you like the filibuster, uh, gross, disgusting. The filibuster should go. I don't know exactly why, but because, you know, recently the Supreme Court has been just as politicized as anything else by the filibuster, and like this idea of like, oh, because we can't totally get rid of this, we're trying to get it to the Supreme Court. That's Lindsey Graham talking. Um, this is a freezer. And so you have these wedge issues, which I think make me understand better how you could have this perspective. Because, granted, a lot of ideas put forth by more left-leaning people seem unrealistic once you sort of deal with the sort of ideological unity it would take between, like upper class, lower class, between smart people and dumb people, and that whole sort of perpetuation of like poor people and rich people that is argued by conservatives is the whole thing keeping people that way. That I think is a large stream of personality, culture, whatever you're gonna call it, on YouTube, like MBTI, like clean your room, which I like. I mean, I think it's okay. I like it. I enjoy the culture. I think it has a certain pizzazz. But that culture, at its root, I think although it has a lot of a point to it with how people talk, I think that ultimately what is being argued is like, Plato's allegory of the cave, and you're like looking at the wall, and you're like, I'm tired of looking at this motherfucking wall. I don't like shadows. And then you're like, I'm unchained to, I don't have to look at the wall anymore, but I still want to hang out in this cave. That's fucking cool. That feels like how anti-establishment right-wingers on YouTube sort of act. I don't know if you identify as a right-winger, probably more as like classical liberal, but and then more of like a, who's that guy? The William F. Buckley sort of vein, and that's not an insult, even though he's disgusting and a frogman, which is awesome. Because William F. Buckley was actually pro-marijuana. Little known fact. But no Republican is anymore. Is that right? Maybe Joshua Gardner in Colorado. But I don't think any other Republican. Maybe the Secretary of State in Washington. Damn. So this is the end of part 1 of the video. And I'll elaborate on stuff later. And watch this video. Goodbye.